Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining me for our next webinar, which today is going to be about cash flow modeling. And just a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces. Today's going to last about 45 minutes. If you've got any questions, please use the question tab on the webinar software that you've got. Tomorrow we're going to be sending out slides and copies of or a link to the recording of this webinar. We're also going to be sending you a feedback survey. It would be very helpful if you can complete that. Helps us to know what next webinars to run, etc. So as I say, today is about, let me just forward this slide on. Today is about cash flow modeling. Cash flow modeling is something we use, we've used a lot in previous years with our existing financial planning clients. And on an increasing basis, because our matrimonial lawyers know that we do cash flow modeling, we're beginning to be asked that we include cash flow modeling in some of our pension sharing reports. So we thought we would elaborate on this, give you some examples and see how it can work for your clients in understanding settlements and planning their future finances. The agenda today is a brief, the first couple of points are a brief update on BlueSKY and the markets, and then the main part of the session will be a look at cash flow and cash flow modeling and how it works. So the brief update on BlueSKY is that we are still open business throughout the lockdown. We haven't furloughed anybody. A lot of us are still working from home, but we do have a skeleton staff in the office. We're very pleased, we're quite proud that over this lockdown period, despite some of the challenges we have in getting information for our pension sharing reports, we've still maintained the turnaround times for our pension sharing reports, which is 4 to 6 weeks once we've got all the information that we need. And we've certainly been experiencing increasing inquiries, which we've been experiencing for many years really, but particularly over lockdown, we've had a lot more inquiries. I'm going to talk in a moment about how we've managed this to maintain our turnaround times. So I'll talk a bit about what we do and what we don't do. But for those of you who may not have seen our pension sharing reports before, they look something like this. We've planned the structure of our someone's put their hand up. Bear with me one moment. Oh, I haven't got any questions, so apologies, I'm doing this on my own, so I'm going to have to deal with the questions as they come in myself. So this is what pension sharing reports look like. We've based them on our financial planning reports that we issue to our, if you like, our general clients. And that is that the structure of our financial planning reports is we want to get to the answer pretty quickly. If a client wants to read through and understand all the detail behind it, they can do. It's all there. But our pension sharing reports follow that similar format. We get to the answer pretty quickly in the report. It's not buried in text. It's in a grid format. We will also put in income profile graphs if we feel that it's going to be helpful in helping you to understand what our pension sharing recommendation has created. And where requested, we will input cash flow modeling graphs and input into those reports. And that's something I'll be covering in a bit. But if we just return to what BlueSKY do and what we don't do, a lot of you know that we do pension sharing reports. I'll come on in a minute to what we don't do. So pension sharing reports and shadow expert work. We prefer case discussion. We are financial planners, so we want to know what's going on and where we can make suggestions along the way. We will do if we're invited to do so. We do quite a lot of mediation or work with mediators. So we'll meet with clients jointly. We'll meet with clients with you if preferred. I think we're best used where there might be some assistance that financial planning input can add, particularly in single joint expert reports, where we can add value to both sides. We, because of our financial planning background, we understand the nature of pension schemes, and therefore where there's multiple schemes or lifetime allowance issues, which is another subject on its own, but where there's high value schemes, there can be quite a lot of assistance that can be provided around lifetime allowance issues and how to save tax and so on and so forth. We'll go all the way through as a separate instruction. Once you've agreed your share, we can help with the implementation of that share and ongoing financial planning. And I think you'll see the value of ongoing financial planning later in this session. And something that I say with a little bit of trepidation is we do offer a service which we would call a fast track service, where you might have a court hearing coming up imminently and you might not have got a report, but you want a bit of guidance as to how a pension share might look, should look, and we can apply a bit of science to that in some cases based on the information you have and how we can extrapolate that. We can often give a pretty good heads up as to what you could expect and what would be fair, which in our view is better by adding a little bit of science around it than perhaps the judge who sticks his finger in the air and makes a bit of a guess in the hearing. What we don't do is that if, when you've had a look at the case or we've had a look at the case and we've understood that the share is likely to come from a scheme where the only option when it's implemented is that the member becomes an internal, that the spouse becomes an internal member of the scheme, is we would refer you on to use actuarial services. And what I mean by that is where the share is likely to come from uniformed services, so it'll be police, fire brigade, army, etc., or the teacher scheme, NHS scheme, local government schemes, where a share is implemented on those schemes, it would result in the spouse becoming an internal member in their own right. But it's a number crunching exercise. It's not much, there's not much need for financial planning input around it. It's a fairly straightforward exercise, as is if you just want a plain vanilla pension sharing report. We would refer you on to actuaries. The main reason for that is we want to focus the work we do on being able to give some good, considered, often financial planning input into the reports we do. It's a way we can maintain our turnaround time and offer you good, ongoing good service. The overall message, which the PAG report, I'm going to be mentioning the PAG report a few times, the PAG report talks about is whether you use an actuary or an IFA, always make sure that they're a pension on divorce expert. So that's what the PAG report calls a PODE. So pension on divorce expert, and in section D of the PAG report, and you will find a link to the PAG report on our website. I'll come on to that in a minute. But in Appendix D, you will find the criteria that your pension on divorce expert should have or should demonstrate from an experience and qualification point of view in order to be able to do or act for you as a single joint expert or a shadow expert. So it's quite useful to look at and to make sure that the people you use have all those can tick all those boxes. A few weeks ago, I did a session on COVID-19 and the effect on the economy and pension funds. And this is just a couple of slides as an update. This is a snapshot over a year of how the markets have done. And in particular, here's the FTSE. This is the headline index that we all hear about on the news, that fell by over 30% at its worst point, still hasn't really recovered. It's only much of, but it's still down nearly 15%. And of course, that's the index that a lot of your clients will quote when they say things like the bottom's fallen out of the market, my pension isn't worth anything anymore, or I want to defer everything until I wait till the markets recover. The point here that I want to make is that most people will be in a pension fund where will be in a pension fund which is a diversified pension fund, and because it won't just be tracking FTSE stocks and shares, it will be internationally invested and very well spread. The chances are most pension funds have recovered either to where they started a year ago or above that. And only as an example, and obviously as a good bit of marketing, BlueSKY have a range of risk managed pension funds. I'm not saying we're any different than any other diversified pension fund, but this is just to show that yes, all funds have fallen, but most well diversified funds have done a good job at catching up. So values have recovered to a large degree. I never, it's my opinion, there was never any reason to defer anyway, even if values hadn't recovered, because even if the markets had fallen and you were implementing a pension share, remember that you will be selling out of the market at a low point and buying in at a low point when you transfer that pension share to another scheme. It is true that over the lockdown, annuity rates have fallen a bit because of underlying interest rates and gilt rates. So we are seeing, not dramatically, we are seeing some reduction in projected incomes when we do our pension sharing work. So that's a brief update, and moving on to the cash flow stuff. I would imagine that a lot of you have seen the cash flow modeling software and might have seen the outputs of it. But for those who haven't, it answers some, in our views, it gives some fantastic insight and in answering questions that pretty much everybody, whether you're divorced or not, I guess, might have about their financial future. Have I got enough to last me into retirement? Will I run out? And if I'm not going to run out, how can I afford to give away money to the children or whatever? In the financial planning arena, that is a fantastic tool. In the divorce arena, it'll answer questions for you like, have I the offer I've been given by the other side, is that enough? Will I run out of money if I accept that offer? How much do I need? Well, if it's not enough, and often in financial settlements, there's a bit of cloth cutting to make expenditure or just make income meet expenditure. Will I have to continue work? If I have to continue work, how long do I have to work? And at what point can I retire? Answer all those questions. We'll come on to an example. But just so we understand how it works, cash flow modeling generally starts with us understanding from an individual how much money do they need to spend. And in this example, the individual has said they want to spend £30,000 per year, and over the long term they wanted to keep up with inflation, which is why we've got that stepped line. That's their expenditure. The cash flow modeling software then says, well, how am I going to meet that expenditure? Now, in this instance, and it's only an example, this is in the first year, it's going to be met by employment, but because this individual wanted to phase their employment, in subsequent years it doesn't meet it. What we do know that they've got is a teacher's pension as well. That will come into play later on. We've got an Aviva pension, which will become payable at some stage in the future. And then what the model does, it says, well, we know what will become payable, so to fill that expenditure, we're going to take money from savings and investments. So what you'll see is that light blue area is where the individual is drawing money from their savings and investments to make expenditure, to meet their expenditure needs. And got a little bit of state pension coming up at the end to be paid there. And what that leaves is a shortfall. And that's, if you like, the power of cash flow modeling, because it will show you the amount of shortfall when it occurs, and then we can have discussions about what to do with it. And I'm going to use that. I'm going to now use a kind of worked example to illustrate that a bit more. So imagine that you've got Jane who's come to you, you've been working with, there's been an agreement made. Jane's employed, £45,000 salary, her expenditure is £40,000. We've negotiated a £12,000 per annum spousal maintenance, payable up until age 65, and she's got an award of £300,000 coming from her husband's pension. So how does that look? Is that enough? Well, based on the facts that we've put there, this is what the settlement looks like. What you'll see is that the black line is her expenditure line, and that's a little bit wobbly because the modelling includes an allowance for taxation, so everything's in there. What we'll see is that around about 80, Jane runs out of money. The line goes red, and if we want to interrogate that further, we could break it down for those people who want that level of detail. We can show how that income need is met from employment, maintenance, and then savings, and then drawing from the pension share. Jane will have an ongoing income from the state pension and a small company pension she's got, but you'll see there's quite a significant shortfall. So going back to the simple version, Jane's going to be worried. Jane's going to say, well, I'm not getting enough of a pension share. What can I do? Now, the first thing, and this is just playing with a few possible scenarios, the first thing is, well, what if we could negotiate an increased pension share from 300 to 400,000? How would that look? And what we can see by flipping backwards and forwards between the slides is that that's pre and that's post increasing the pension share by £100,000. It makes a bit of difference. It probably makes about 5 years difference, but doesn't do a fantastic job. So what else could we do? Well, we could reduce expenditure. We could talk to Jane about really, what is your expenditure? This could be disclosed or non-disclosed, of course, but this is probably where behind the scenes you might say, well, can we make that offer work? You might use some of these slides as some evidence to negotiate a higher settlement, but once you've done as much as you can done, we might work with Jane to say, well, look, if you reduce your expenditure from £40,000 to £35,000 per annum, you actually make quite a difference by flipping between the two. Still not done enough. So what else can we do? And this is where we would work with the client to say, well, what if, for instance, what if we downsized the property at some stage? So Jane moved, released some capital. In this case, she's downsizing at age 75 and releasing £150,000 of equity. So what we see in the cash flow model is that spiky bit where she downsizes, that's where the money coming in and going out. But we've now eliminated the shortfall, because what's happened, and if we remember that this is a income and expenditure chart, as a cash flow chart, if we look behind this at, well, what are the assets which Jane has, then if we look at the graph of assets, what we can see is that in early years, Jane, Jane is spending here from her savings and investments, and that's the pension. The green is the pension, which, because she's now downsized here and spent the equity to support her income, it's meant that she can defer when she starts drawing her pension. And in that instance, we can see that she's not got a shortfall. In fact, she's got quite a big surplus in her pension fund. And then, of course, what we can do is we can play with different permutations that might be relevant to Jane, that would make her financial position work in the future. So hopefully you'll be able to see what a fantastic tool it can be to maybe use some of the charts or some of the information to negotiate a better settlement. But once you've got the best you can get, it's then working with the individual to say, look, don't panic. This is how it can work. And it's just that enables that individual to see down the foggy financial road that probably faces them. What I thought I'd do now is we talk a lot in our webinars and in the workshops we do about the PAG report, and I wanted to talk about a case which Hess judged on, and it was reported well reported case. The link to the case is on the slide, which, of course, remember, you will get tomorrow. But it's W versus H that Hess judged on, and he made loads of comments in it relating back and quoting the PAG report. And we're seeing more and more judges quoting from the PAG report. So if you haven't read it or you're not familiar with it, now's the time to get familiar with it, because you will probably come across judges who are being guided by the principles in the PAG report. And the topics that Hess talks about, and Hess was on the committee that formed the PAG report, so yeah, I guess he's got a vested interest to see it being used. But I thought this case was a particularly well written and articulated judgment. He talks about pension sharing and the equality of capital versus. He talks about pension sharing in terms of whether you share capital or income. It also talks about ring fencing. This is pre and post marriage assets and pension accrual, and also passes comment on offsetting and how complicated it can be, and there's a danger in mixing categories of assets, and supporting or recommending the use of a pension on divorce expert code. So I just wanted to elaborate on the Hess case a little bit. And it's quite a detailed case, and I've paraphrased it here, but essentially there are around 50-year-old couple, a fairly long marriage, 3 kids. What's interesting about this case is there's not many assets outside of the pension. So the pension and how the pension was dealt with was quite important in this case. So a £2 million pension case. You know, these are ones where there's lifetime allowance, taxation issues present. The lifetime allowance issue is something we've done workshops on in the past, but they are becoming more and more present because more and more people with increasing fund sizes are falling into the lifetime allowance trap. But anyway, just before we get onto the cash flow stuff, some of the points he made in his judgment, and section 60 talked about a division of pensions. The need to use a pension on divorce expert, because you should not divide the capital, the pensions based on capital. It should be a drive to provide equal incomes, and he states equality of income will often be the fair result. And he also comments on defined benefit pensions, and to the extent that it is quite common that defined benefit pension schemes have very poor cash equivalents when compared with how much it would cost to replace those benefits on the open market. And that's quite common, and that's another reason why you need a pension on divorce expert to look at the case to find out how incomes can be maximized between the two parties. He also talks about pre and post marriage assets, and the PAG report talks about this on page 22 in some detail. But the whole point here is that what the PAG report endorses, which was present before the PAG report was done, and that is the opinion that where there's a needs case, the courts have recourse to any assets, whether it's before marriage or after, or whether it's before or after marriage or whatever. They have recourse to any asset necessary in order to make sure that needs are met, and that in their opinion, and in the PAG report opinion, even cases of low millions are often still needs based. And we get a lot of pension sharing report instructions where we are asked to separate out pre and post marriage accrual and do pension sharing calculations based on pre and post pension accrual. And even though the cases are evidently needs based, and if it went to court, there's a high likelihood that the judge would say, well, I'm going to compare everything because this is a needs-based case. So in some cases, we are having dialogue with our instructing lawyers as to whether pre and post marriage accrual calculations are necessary. One reason why we try and steer away from it is because the approach of working out what pension was accrued at the date of marriage is a inaccurate science, because it uses what in actuarial terms they call the straight line method. It's fairly inaccurate and therefore unfair. There's a lot more detail behind that, but generally just remember, in needs cases, all assets should normally be considered. Just returning to the cash flow that we did. So what I did is I took this case that Hess judged on, and I thought, well, I wonder how this looked, how the judgment looks in a cash flow model. Now, it looks pretty good in a way because there's no red immediately apparent, or not a lot of red immediately apparent, and that's because obviously the pension fund was a pretty big pension fund and therefore can go a long way. But the points to note here are that there was an agreement to rehouse when the current mortgage period had finished. And that's the spike there, because the house was sold and then they divided the equity and the wife would rehouse. So this is the wife's cash flow model. Here we've got a lifetime allowance tax charge, which is this is what we just call a base plan, because once we know where we are, we might offer some financial planning assistance to help perhaps reduce that lifetime allowance tax charge if possible. What is evident, excuse me, is that in the early years we've created a shortfall. And if I just expand that a little bit, this looks quite positive, but if the wife knew, well, it would become evident in the early years, she would think, goodness me, I haven't got enough money to meet my expenditure. That might cause a lot of panic. If you put it into a longer term context, you can demonstrate that, yes, okay, there's only a few years of shortfall and there's many, many years of surplus. That actually, that shortfall almost pales into insignificance, and then you can have conversations with the client about how they would how they would deal with that. Would it be cutting the cloth, or would it be worthwhile raising money, because you know it's a defined amount of money over a short period of time, which can be repaid later on. Here we have no shortfall, and if you look at the assets behind what drives that model, that we can see here, we can see this is where the wife rehouses from her share of equity and also tax-free cash from the pension. And in this instance, we can see that she doesn't run out of money. She's still got a significant amount of money at 90. We could even stretch that on to 100. We normally do go to 100, but this looks quite comfortable. So this should give her comfort that she's got enough money, the offer is good, and we can then look at other scenarios to say, well, what if we increased her expenditure in retirement by £20,000? This is where you can play with different scenarios. Or what if she increased her expenditure by £20,000 in her early retirement, and then halfway through retirement she reduced her expenditure, because lots of people, as they get older in retirement, find that they spend less money. So we can see that if she spent £20,000 more per annum in retirement, she's running out of money. You can see from an asset point of view, this green was her pension fund. She's pulled a lot of money out of her pension and run out. Of course, one scenario we can discuss here is, okay, you're now 77 here. What about downsizing at this point? And downsizing can release some more cash, which can help elongate that. If we increased expenditure by just £10,000 per annum, then obviously the money will last a bit longer. So there's all sorts of different permutations that we can look at. So that was my look at the Hess case, and of course we can do this with many other cases. In fact, I mentioned before about more and more judges quoting PAG, and the link here will lead you to numerous other reported cases where the PAG report has been quoted and guidance taken from the PAG report as to how pensions and financial matters should be dealt with on divorce. So that's my bit on cash flow. I'm trying to stick to time, which I think we're fairly good with. The benefits of cash flow, I hope you will see that it is visual, and for those people who are detailed people, it does allow you to interrogate. Each one of those cash flow bars I showed you can be exploded into a breakdown of how much tax is being paid that year, where the money's come from, what the value of the investments are. Importantly, it allows you to test an offer. So it can test an offer, and we've seen it useful in negotiation of larger awards, or if anything else, if you can demonstrate to a client that the award that they're getting is enough for their future needs, it can take the heat out of an argument. And in many cases, people will say, well, look, rather than fighting for the last penny, which happens in a lot of cases, actually, if I get that, I'm happy. I've got enough money for my needs. I can now not spend more money or suffer the stress and anxiety of continued fighting. So testing offers helps you to plan for the future. And with our longer term financial planning clients, so lots of our clients that we help through divorce are ongoing long-term clients, excuse me, we can revisit their financial planning every year when we update them on their financial position. So we would revisit this, we can make changes, they can add scenarios, that they can test scenarios to see whether they can give money away or go on holiday and they're still not going to run out of money. So the final slide is just a reminder of the help from BlueSKY. Love to have case discussions. There's there's three, if you like, client-facing advisors, and we all do pension sharing reports. We're all members of Resolution. We do a lot of shadow expert work, so you might have had an actuary's report already done, but maybe you don't understand it fully or know what is the best option or whether it seems right. We can look at that. I've demonstrated, hopefully demonstrated the benefits of cash flow modelling. Have a look at our website, because we've got lots of resources for solicitors that we're continually adding to. They can be, there's a link to the PAG report there, but there's also case studies and information sheets which you might find useful that pertain to pension sharing. We do help with implementation and ongoing financial advice. I mentioned before about, I think, certainly relative to many other pension sharing report services, I think we're pretty quick, and I'm biased, and I am biased because I'd say we're fairly competitive as well. So look, I think that's the end of my session, and I'm well within 45 minutes. I can't see that there's any questions at the moment, but look, you will have in the invite that you were sent, you will have our contact details. So if there are any questions or cases that you wish to discuss, do either drop us an email or pick the phone up, and pick the phone up to the office, and we will be able to speak to you. So look, thank you very much for listening, and if you really love this session, then we're running it again on Friday. If you think it's worthwhile that someone else should listen to it, then mention to them that we're doing it on Friday morning. So thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.